Evolve IP, the name we sing. Bring us all the virtual thing. Desktop dreams in a digital sky. Ride that tech wave high.
Kevin, there's a big question out there, and I think you're the man with the answers. There have been a lot of changes in the VMware licensing landscape, and it's impacted customers and clients alike in various different ways. Can you start with maybe a high-level summary of what changes have happened and some of the immediate impacts on people? And then, we'll ask some questions along the way about specific impacts. But I'd like to unpack this, the mystery of the licensing changes and what it means to people who consume VMware.
Yeah, it's a great question, Vic, and certainly something that has been a massive point of conversation throughout all of 2024 thus far. So for anybody who may be unfamiliar, this all really started towards the tail end of 2023 when Broadcom announced their acquisition of VMware. So in the course of doing that acquisition, there are a few things that happen, but we'll really try to boil it down to three main high-level items for today's conversation, right? So first and foremost, Broadcom decided to fundamentally re-architect the way the VMware partner program worked. So the impact of that was now if you were a VMware partner, so if you were a customer or a company who provided VMware services, either for yourself or for your customers, you used to have an engagement directly with VMware. You used to have some form of, tie into their sales team, into their support team. You would procure your licensing through them. Broadcom came in and really changed that. Basically, in essence, they said, hey, we really only want to work with the biggest VMware partners that are out there in the space. So if you were below a certain level, if you had under a certain amount of cores that were licensed and under management within your infrastructure, they basically said, we're going to put a new tiered program in place that has premier partners, pinnacle partners, and then all of everyone else, right? So if you fell into that all of everyone else bucket, guess what? Now your direct line into VMware, into Broadcom, no longer exists. If you want to reach out for sales, if you want to procure licensing, if you want to get support, you're now reaching out to those other companies that fall into that pinnacle or into that premier tier. So now they've put this new kind of, tiered pyramid in place that Broadcom is alone at the top, and they'll distribute things out through their partnerships. And then those partners do that further distribution of licensing and provide support for, end users that are out there for, whether that is a provider or whether that is themselves a consumer of the VMware services. So that's the main thing, right? That's thing number one.
Well, hold on. Let me ask a question here, because that's a good distinction to drive home a little bit. If I'm the CIO of a company and we use VMware, we have our own infrastructure, we don't do it as a service, we have our own VMware instances for server virtualization, or maybe our own Horizon view, desktop virtualization. You're saying that the way I buy licensing has changed.
Correct. So correct with an asterisk, right?
Okay.
And the asterisk is if you were working through a reseller, like one of the larger resellers in the industry, then you very well may still be working through that same reseller, but that reseller's partnership with Broadcom and VMware.
Understood.
So if I'm buying my licenses through like Vic and Co., VMware distributor, I might still, as an end user, as a CIO with my own internal infrastructure, be purchasing them from you. But if you, Vic, used to have a direct relationship with a sales rep from VMware, you're now maybe working with an Evolve IP, who is your VCSP, your VMware Cloud Services Provider, to offer that licensing. Now, that's not always the case. So there are customers who had perpetual licensing that was from VMware directly as well for their own internal workloads. And unfortunately, as we've seen in many different cases over the years, part of this acquisition and this restructuring, Broadcom has in essence changed the definition of the word perpetual, right? Perpetual should mean forever. And when you purchase that licensing, you probably thought it did mean forever. However, now perpetual just means up until this change went into effect in 2024. And that licensing that should have been good going forward, you now need to go out and procure new subscription-based licensing for yourself as well.
Okay.
So customers are still going through some changes, but it's a little bit of a different change than we're seeing on the partnership side with the new VCSP program.
Understood. Okay, well, thanks for that. You were about to expand upon some of your VMware wisdom.
So we'll put wisdom in air quotes there, but so that actually is kind of the second use case there, right? Which is, so the first use case is VCSP partners, right? So if you're a VMware partner, your world has been fundamentally altered in the last few months. If you're a direct VMware customer, those are those folks like that CIO that has their own license that they're running on their own workloads, usually in their own data center and their own facilities. Their world is changing as well, not solely just because the underlying licensing has changed. So, again, no longer perpetual licensing, going to a subscription-based model. Broadcom has also taken this vast amount of VMware SKUs that existed within the product catalog and thinned it down to like 2 or 3 things, right? So now there's, VCF, so VMware Cloud Foundations, which is what you use if you're a cloud service provider. There's VVF, which is vSphere Foundation, which is what you use if you are running your own workloads. And they've taken all the ancillary pieces that used to accompany those things and really rolled them into that product set. So if I'm a customer, what that means to me is, depends on which side of the coin you look at, right? One side of the coin says, hey, now this is a lot easier because there's less for me to purchase. And when I do purchase licensing, I now have access and entitlement to all of these other benefits, which is a good thing. The bad side of that coin is, now I have access to all of these other entitlements, which might be things that I didn't necessarily want to use that I'm now fundamentally paying for as part of the license that I'm subscribing to.
Okay.
So their world has changed as well. So that's the second of kind of the 3 categories. And we'll talk about the third one probably at length. So I'll put a pin in that one for now. We can circle back to it when it makes sense.
No, it's good. I love it. Let's jump into it. Let's talk about that third tier.
So thing number 3 is probably, in my opinion, because it's something that I work with on a daily basis, one of the largest of these 3, right? So part of this acquisition, one of the decisions that Broadcom also made is that they really no longer wanted to be in the virtualized end user computing space. So VMware had a solution. They were a DAS provider with their VMware Horizon platform for years now, right? So I know we personally at Evolve have been running that platform since its inception. I want to say it's at least 7 or 8 years at this point. And it's been a great platform, right? The vast majority of the customers that we've historically had that are DAS customers leverage Horizon and are happy with it. But through this acquisition, Broadcom really just decided they didn't want to be in that business anymore. So what does that mean for all of the Horizon customers that are out there? Well, fortunately, what's happened is that end user computing arm of VMware, that Horizon team, has decided to stay together. And they went out and got fully divested as a whole business unit and were acquired by a company called KKR to basically rebrand and rebadge as their own standalone company. So they are now called Omnisa, Omnissa. And they have really within the last few weeks, as of the time of this recording, started to launch their organization, started to launch their company. And they're taking that Horizon solution set that many of us know and love, and they will be expanding upon that in the future as their own fully isolated and separate entity. So they now have the DAS piece, they have the Workspace ONE piece, and they're doing everything they can to layer those together and make for an even more compelling and more interesting desktop as a service solution going forward.
Interesting. So for customers today that are Evolve IP customers that are getting a Horizon View desktop, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that as I'm sure you can imagine, we've gotten a lot of in the last few months. So the good news is at this point in time, nothing is really changing. So Horizon continues to be an offering. All of the Horizon licensing, the Horizon solution is going through that rebadging process, but they haven't even rebranded the solutions that we're using yet. So our intention is to continue to stay the course with Horizon. And as Omnisa works to come out with future releases, future versions, future updates, to continue to embrace and offer those. That said, we do understand that there's some uncertainty that goes into all of that as well, right? So change is always a potentially violent process and things can happen. So as a result, we've also been stepping up over the last couple of years our Citrix offerings, in addition to what we're doing with our VMware offerings. So we do offer both platforms. We do have the ability to pivot customers between them. So I don't anticipate this happening, but should we ever read the tea leaves and think in the future, maybe we're not feeling so great about some of the things Omnisa is doing, we have the ability to continue to offer services with a comparable solution for our customers, really at no price differential between the two. Now, I say no price differential, and that brings to mind another interesting point, right? So, I'll kind of cover up the Evolve IP logo for a second here and think, if you were Citrix, right? So if you were a DAS provider, you offered your own DAS solution, at kind of the core foundational solution level, and you saw all this tumultuous change happening throughout 2024, what do you think you would do? Like, Vic, I from the times that we've worked together, I consider you a very astute business person. I would think you would look at an opportunity like that and roll up your sleeves and think like, man, how can I dive in and capitalize on this and corner as much of that market share as I can, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so I don't know why, but that's just not what Citrix decided to do. So interestingly enough, as all this change is happening in the VMware space and Omnis is carving out on their own and forging their own path in the future now, Citrix decided that this was also the right time for them to fundamentally work to re-architect their licensing and pricing structures of their back-end solutions as well. So we talk about that ability to offer either or in terms of solution, but the really interesting thing is both of those solution sets are undergoing a lot of change right now and are looking to, kind of decide what the next iteration of the future versions of the DAS approach to end user computing is going to be. So, it's not just as simple as like, hey, we're going to switch, flip a switch and say, instead of doing Horizon, instead of doing Omnisa, we're going to do Citrix exclusively. Think for us, the benefit is really being able to bring both solutions to the market and being able to leverage either one to help accomplish the specific task that our end users and their customers ultimately want to accomplish.
Is there a transition date announced as to when the VMware Horizon solution will no longer be badged VMware?
So technically, I think as far as an official date, it's already come and gone. So that all coincided with when Omnisa basically had their launch event and divested themselves from all of the old Horizon portals, all of the old support portals, all of the old licensing mechanisms. So that happened in, I believe it was initially supposed to be April. I think by the time all of the dust had settled, it was closer to June of 2024.
Okay.
And Omnisa did most of their official launch events within the last several weeks of the time of this recording. So a lot of that was like late July, early August 2024. So that's all done. Now, as far as like end of support, end of life, change of life cycle of the existing solutions that are out there, I don't think at this point in time there's any intention of them saying like, hey, we're pulling the plug on any of these things. They understand that, folks who were Horizon customers will continue to be Horizon customers for the foreseeable future. And that actually gives Omnisa, an opportunity to really knuckle down and figure out what they want their first official release of their version of the platform to be.
So if you need support today at Evolve on DAS, who do you call?
Yeah, so we have a direct line of communication into the Omnisa team, and they are actively supporting all of the old Horizon instances.
Great. And what level of partnership does Evolve have with the NewCo?
That's a great question, Vic. And honestly, off the top of my head, I don't know that I have an answer for you. I know that we have a partnership with them, but I'm not sure that they even have fully defined levels of that partnership yet.
Okay. So if I'm a standalone customer, I run my own infrastructure, I run desktop as a service internally, I've got my, VMware infrastructure in place, and now I'm going to navigate, changing that support arm. Like, tell me how that's going let's talk about the customers that could be leveraging you versus the ones that are.
Yeah.
What are those customers up against now?
Yeah, it's another great question, right? And the reality is that the apple cart has been firmly upset at this point, right? So all of those customers are now in a position where they are dealing with change, and they're dealing with, somewhat monumental change that's happening at a very quick pace. As again, all of this process started, the conversations about this acquisition really came out into the public sphere at the end of 2023. So we're only 8 months removed from when, this all started to kind of get rolling from an acquisition perspective. And then all the ramifications have been kind of dripped out in the 4 or 5 months after that. So it wasn't really until April of 2024 that anyone even had a firm sense of direction as to how things were going to be going forward. So if you were a customer who, leverages VMware for your server hosting, potentially for your desktop solution in-house, you're in a position where your licensing is changing, your costs are changing, the way you receive support and potentially whom you receive support from is all changing as well. So to me, this is one of the first big compelling events. Maybe not so much on the desktop side. We'll put that off to the side for a moment. When we talk specifically about server hosting, right, about infrastructure as a service, in my mind, as someone who's been in this space since back in 2012, the IaaS conversation was largely dormant. I venture to say dead, but I don't know that I necessarily want to put that last nail in the coffin. But it had been quiet since about 2017 to the extent that we had evolved. We really kind of stopped talking about it on the public sphere. It's not that it was something that we didn't continue to do, but basically, I think our view was that if you were not doing cloud hosting of your servers, if you weren't embracing infrastructure as a service, it wasn't for a lack of awareness that it was an option, right? There was probably some fundamental driving force that was compelling you to keep your systems in-house. You either didn't trust the cloud, so you had a cloud aversion.
Yep.
You potentially had unsupportable workloads, so things like maybe like Oracle systems or something that just wouldn't support virtualization, AS400s, things like that. Or you just couldn't commit to that way of approaching this in an OpEx model versus a CapEx model, right? So you might have just not been okay with that subscription-based approach to how you were paying for your resources and your licensing. But guess what? Now, whether you're running in-house or you're running with a provider, you find yourself in that position where you're now going to that subscription-based model, right? It's kind of like the in-house Exchange server to the Office 365 conversation all over again, but at a much larger scale, because now we're dealing with entire server rooms full of systems.
Right.
So those customers now have the first real kind of shot in the arm of, hey, it might be time for us to maybe consider IaaS, but certainly consider reevaluating the way that we've always done things. We're reevaluating having rack servers in our environment, in our own virtualization solution, because that's going to end up costing us more money and going into that subscription-based model. So the way I would look at that, were I a customer, is, well, if I'm going to be paying those types of premiums anyway, I may as well look at working with a solutions provider who I can also get some additional benefit from, like maybe an easier path to disaster recovery and business continuity, maybe some managed services that can work as an enablement tool or an optimization tool to extend the capabilities of my own internal IT team, right? So we can, hopefully help to get folks out of the keeping the lights on part of the business that most IT folks don't really tend to enjoy doing anyway, to free them up to do work that they're, more passionate about, more directly bottom line impacting within their organizations. So I think for those types of customers, the inevitability of change has now come. So now it's just a matter of looking at all the resources you have and figuring out what that path forward is. And I think there are a lot of customers that are now going to look to embrace the cloud for those workloads. So the next fork in the road for them is, well, do I just go the public cloud route and drop it into an Azure, an AWS, or a Google? Or do I look to work with a cloud services provider like an Evolve IP who can maybe host some of that stuff for us in a private cloud solution? Maybe put some of that stuff for us in a public cloud solution, maybe intertwine those two things to work together and then layer some additional services and solutions on top of it.
Yeah, those are a lot of good options for folks going forward. So if Chris were an infrastructure manager and he bought his licensing from Vicco, as you stated before, and previously Vicco dealt directly with VMware, but now Vicco no longer deals with VMware, so he's going to have to reach out to me, and I'm going to have to reach out to somebody else, maybe like an Evolve or somebody who's maintaining those two upper tiers. What are the benefits of getting sort of closer to the heartbeat? So if Chris now has an option, says, hey, Vic, you've been great, but now I'm twice removed from the support versus once removed, or I was twice, now I'm 3 times removed. What are the compelling reasons to get a little bit closer to the better sources of support at this point?
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of different ways to answer this, right? So first and foremost, like you just said, right, having that more direct line of access into supportability, but also moving into more of a hosting model as opposed to doing it yourself probably eliminates the need for the vast majority and potentially all of that support anyway. So the route I've taken when we talk about customers who come to us, down this path is, look, if you're going to be paying for that subscription-based model and your licensing costs, so if Chris buys through Vicco and Vicco buys through Evolve IP and Evolve IP is the partner who works with Broadcom, the unfortunate reality is everyone's costs along that chain have probably gone up in the last 6 months. And it's not that the individual, actual line items from Broadcom are more expensive. They are, but it's almost borderline negligible. The problem is the way that, in addition to changing the licensing, the way that Broadcom now accounts for that license usage has also changed. So it used to be, customers would take one of two tracks, right? You could either do the tall and thin model of how you build your infrastructure, or you could do the short and wide model, right? Unlike me, who's tall and wide, but that's a story for a different day. So if you went in that tall and thin model, you probably didn't deploy many hosts, but the hosts that you had a lot of resources in them. So you packed fewer servers with more CPU, more memory, maybe more disk, but disk was probably something that you did, on the network on the side as a SAN or a NAS. The short and wide model, you probably have more hosts, so you put more servers in place with less resources per server to distribute that workload across a larger surface area, right? So the way VMware now calculates the license utilization, if you're in that short and wide model, they have decided that every single CPU socket that exists out there counts as a minimum of 8 cores, regardless of how many CPU cores are actually in use. So to put that in non-tech speak, right? Basically, you're just now paying more money for resources that you're not utilizing to their fullest capacity. So if you're in that tall and thin structure, congratulations. You inadvertently future-proofed your environment and you guys didn't get pinched financially. If you're in that short and wide model, these are the folks that you see on Reddit and Twitter and LinkedIn that have been freaking out since December because they're saying that their VMware costs are quadrupling or in some cases doing a 10x multiplier. So if you find yourself in that position, your cost is already increasing. And your cost is increasing for no discernible change in the service that you receive, right? It's not that their service is going to get worse if Chris reaches out to Vic reaches out to Kevin, and Kevin reaches out to Broadcom, but it's also not going to be any better. It's just the same support, the same service. We're solving the same problem in the same way. So to me, I look at that and think, man, for what I'm paying, why don't I just look to get out of the business of managing this infrastructure outright, right? And especially if I were a VMware customer who already knows and loves the VMware solution, then why not work with a provider who has that direct relationship with VMware that can continue to host your systems on VMware, but just do it on their hardware instead of yours. So it's the same solution you know and love. It's the same solution you're familiar with, the same solution that you've already been administering yourself, probably going on 10, 12 years at this point. But now you've decoupled yourself from having to manage that physical infrastructure and can keep those physical running boxes with the blinking lights on in your data center. That stuff just goes away. And at that point, there really is nothing left to support because once you go to the infrastructure as a service model, if there are any problems from a licensing perspective, from a hardware perspective, from a platform perspective, these are all things that provider is going to deal with as part of their service. And Chris, in this example, would no longer have to worry about that. Then all Chris has to worry about is the actual running virtual servers that live within that infrastructure and the job that they're doing to support his environment.
I'm going to tell you a short story, and you'll see the reason behind it. There have been a couple of times in my career in the past where I've come into organizations for cleanup. The leadership team got completely frustrated with where technology was going. Things were falling down all the time. And in one of those instances, we ran a 10,000 seat Citrix environment. What we were running there, Marc? Metaframe? No, it was post Metaframe.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, so
presentation server days.
What's that?
In the presentation server days.
Yeah, maybe. But my point is that these systems, whether it be VMware or Citrix or whatever, they really require a lot of fine tuning, and not all fine tuning is the same. And so when we walked into this opportunity, the Citrix platform been up for a period of time. the resources that they had, the company we had at the time, they were good, but they never ran an 80,000 seat virtualized environment with very specific types of application uses and things of the like. And so I quickly identified that we didn't have a desire gap, we had an experience gap. So we went and hired 2 people out of a healthcare system that ran this thing at 80,000 seats, and it solved the problem. Pardon me. It got wrestled to the ground pretty quickly. Same thing with VMware. Lots of people run it. Lots of people have configured it. They tune it. They get the manuals out. They do these things on their own, but they've not run, the amount of seats or licenses that, let's say, an Evolve IP runs. Mm. Aside from that sort of experience, and maybe we could even talk about that a little bit, talk about how you guys specialize in what you're dealing with, but how do we help people understand the true value and benefits of an as a service outside of money, outside of this new sort of twist in the licensing and the cost? Like, listen, if you come to Vic, I'm a cloud first guy, virtual, private, or public. I just think the leverage is too compelling to pass up. I've got speed, I've got scalability. I don't have to tie up millions of dollars in infrastructure and depreciate it. I can use that capital for something else that's going to acquire customers versus supporting the customers I have. That's how I think. And it's how a number of companies that I deal with think as well. However, there are a subset of these customers that still, they hug their infrastructure. There's a lot of pride in standing up metal, running data centers, doing all of these things. What are 3 things you can say about the advantages of using a company like an Evolve IP? We touched on one, expertise, but let's unpack that topic a little bit.
Yeah. So when it comes to expertise specifically, as one of those benefits, look, I don't want to oversimplify it, but it really just comes down to the fact that you are working with a structured team that has a very deep technical bench that has been delivering these solutions at scale for, in some cases, a decade plus, right? Like, we have folks that have been elbow deep into VMware from an infrastructure perspective, from a desktop perspective, folks that have 7, 8, 9 years experience in Citrix as well, that this is just what they do all day, every day. So when you have an internal IT team that's tasked with, designing these solutions, administering these solutions, supporting these solutions, in addition to the myriad of other plates that they have to continue to spin, odds are you're probably not getting that focused attention coming from that wealth of experience just to maintain those individual platforms and systems. So there really is a massive benefit to me just in that experience at scale, component of it, where you are working with experts who then, in the event that those experts get stumped, to the conversation that we had earlier, now also have a direct line of support into the platform vendors that are now only further removed from those, direct end user customers at the end of the day. So that's also a big component of it as well, is that, look, it's admirable if you can, go through and build and configure and run these systems in-house, but it's becoming much, much harder for you to continue to support them even after you successfully do that, just because the vendors themselves aren't built in a way that allows them to directly engage with one-off customers in a one-on-one capacity anymore. I think about it akin to how many times these days do we run into folks who are still running their own in-house Exchange server, right? It's not that they can't. It's not because they don't have the technical drive to do it or the ambition to want to maintain it. Even though that second one, I would question a little bit as someone who had to do that for a lot of years. Yeah. But it's not that you can't do it. It's just that Microsoft has made it really, really, really challenging to the point that you might as well just not do it, right? They've kind of gotten everyone to throw in that towel and just concede, like, okay, fine, we're going to go to the as a service model. And it's just the direction that most of the major players in the platform and vendor space have elected to build things.
Yeah, Kevin, also talented people seek out challenging opportunities. They also want to have their hands in the latest and greatest because they want to maintain currency in their skill set. They want to have access to, all solutions that come out. So if I'm a virtualization engineer and I work for a company, and let's say it's sizable. Let's say I got 10,000 users and hundreds of VMs. I'm going to get pretty good experience, but I may go through a budget crunch, or I might not get the upgrade path that I want, and I might not get something new. And so I might start seeking out a company like an Evolve IP to say, hey, wait a minute, hundreds of thousands of hosts, hundreds of or thousands and thousands of virtualized servers, data centers across the country, public cloud experience, dumping stuff in there. It's like, now I have this playground. So for companies, getting the talent is one thing, keeping it's another. And I learned a very hard lesson. It used to not be this way. I used to be able to attract talent in-house. And the very first time we tried writing a mobile app, we wanted to create our own mobile app for our business. And so I'm like, okay, we hired a company, we paid, whatever we paid, I forget. And we created something very simple as a proof of concept to see if the customer base would like it. And they did. And then it's okay, we've got enough here to say we should continue to invest in it. We're going to need somebody that writes iOS stuff, and we're going to need somebody who writes Android stuff. And so we're going to need at least 2 developers because it's going to be a lot. And gosh, we went out and tried to hire these people. We couldn't get one interview. And it's not that we weren't financially compelling and competitive. It's just that when we finally said, hey, who does this all day, every day? We walked into a company here in Dallas called Bottle Rocket. And when you walked in the lobby of Bottle Rocket had every single app icon on a board through their conference room. And I think almost every app that was out at the time was just on this board. They did all the apps. When you walked around the floor, they had a pool of talent and people that were just crushing it. Mm-hmm. They were absolutely crushing it. And I said, okay, this is where the talent is. They want to work here. They worked on Coke. They worked on GM. They worked on Ford. They worked on every big logo you could possibly imagine. And here they're going to work on one app, and they're going to create this one app. Yeah, they're going to get paid, but what's the newest, latest, sexiest thing they're going to do? How are they going to be challenged? So I think the same thing exists in most infrastructure. I think the talented folks want the challenge, and they move on. Hey, Marc, this is a good segue. You've done a lot of work over the last 8 years in supporting, clients that have, predominantly virtualized services, whether it be desktop as a service, domain services, all the things, call it company in a box, so to speak. And not to make that sound small, we've supported thousands of people in customer bases doing this. Mm-hmm. What have been some of the benefits you have seen from a technical skills perspective and being able to really, deliver high quality, highly available solutions without the need for an army of people? And then the army you select to have are creating sort of business defining solutions that really meet the face of the customer. What kind of experience have you had without naming customer names?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things we found was ease of use, availability, being able to support companies that are geographically all over the country. Them being able to have their people be geographically around the country, being able to support them. One of the big things about, using Evolve as a partner too, is we don't have to worry about some of the pipes and plumbing, so to speak, right? We get to work on the front end stuff, the keeping the users up and keeping them running. And so from a support standpoint, I've been able to support hundreds, even thousands of people by myself, because I'm not doing all of the extra maintenance, all of the other stuff on the servers, and I got to do updates, and I got to do patches, and I got to worry about security. I'm doing all those extra things that, you need that IT staff of people to go out and do. That's being handled by the partner. We're able just to keep the desktops up, customize users, build everything they need to get going, and just keep it running that way. It makes my life really easy being able to use cloud infrastructure and partners like Evolve.
All right, so just to define that a little bit more clearly, that scenario is a customer really doesn't have the level of expertise that you provide.
Yeah.
Right, because as I always talk to Evolve, they always say, hey, our best customer is the director of IT. Right, we do need a technical resource. We provide all this great stuff. So in your case, you're the virtual director of IT for a couple of companies. They've even elected not to have that position.
Mm-hmm.
They've engaged with us and you to say, hey, you be our director of IT, and you work with Evolve to make sure on our behalf that all of these things run. And yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not dealing with internet connectivity outbound from the data center out. You're not dealing with patching. You're not dealing with notifications on maintenance. I mean, you're the recipient of all of those things when you're dealing with the communication.
Yeah.
What's your scalability experience been like?
I mean, we had one customer went from 85 people to 1,000 in less than 2 years. I mean, without them even, skipping a beat. It was just, hey, I need a desktop. Open a ticket. I need 10 desktops. I need 20 desktops. Being able to take that image, clone it out, build it. The back end, being able to go in and build users and have them on there. I mean, we could deploy a desktop and have a new person logged in less than 20 minutes. HR didn't get that person. Oh, by the way, this person starts today. Oh, okay. Well, instead of scrambling, trying to find a laptop, running around the building, trying to do all these things, a 10-minute process. You got a desktop, email, users build, and that person's logged in and working. Because everything they do now is now loaded into that desktop. They log straight into it. Everything they have logs in for them. Their email comes up. There's not all this extra customization and all these specialized things you have to do for each individual laptop or each individual desktop. It just makes...
That's a game changer too, because even if locally a company is providing virtualized solutions for themselves, they still have to manage the capacity and the infrastructure and things alike. So you may get an overrun. Hey, we just did an acquisition. It was real quiet and real secretive, but we're going to board all these users in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
We couldn't really socialize it because it's, affect our stock price. And so it's quiet, but hey, we just announced it and we're going to start loading users in 2 weeks. Then, the infrastructure managers go into the consoles and go, we're boarding 300 people. Let me do the math. I've got enough slivers of infrastructure for desktops here for 50. Okay. And then what's the knock-on impact on print services and share drives and all these? Wow, I'm out of storage. I'm out of this. I'm out of that. Like I might not have that capacity. And so those boardings go from, as you said, minutes or portions of an hour to procurement, right? I need infrastructure, scheduling maintenance windows to install that infrastructure, paying for that infrastructure, configuring, compiling, doing all of these things. And I mean, shoot, we've worked in organizations where, hey, we need 4 to 6 weeks advance notice, or I worked in bigger organizations, or we did actually. And, those services were up higher in the chain. And, we had to put these tickets in to get these kind of services that took a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're saying with this experience, with particularly with Evolve, is that the company has this massive scale flexibility to say, hey, I'm boarding 10 new people. I start new hire training on Monday. I need these desktops built by Friday, and you can turn those around very, very quickly.
I mean, the beauty of it, we had a customer that a mortgage company that they came one day and by the way, we have 50 people starting on Monday. It was Thursday. Okay, sure, no problem. 10 minutes later, I pick up the phone and calling them, and resources are being added, storage is being added, licenses are being added. By Friday, we had all the desktops built. Monday morning, you'd have never known we were completely out of storage and out of space on things, and had to build all those things. It just overnight, customer wasn't a big deal. No impacts to users or anything.
Hey, Kevin, you look like you want to jump in here.
Yeah, I just want to say, if you think about it from the customer perspective too, it's easy to think about when you hear these types of scaling conversations, you're thinking oh man, if we're going from 100 people to 170 people or 200 people or 1,000 people. But, I hearken back to the days when I used to do Citrix presentation server, MetaFrame designs, multi-session computing solutions for smaller companies. And it can be just as much, if not more, of a problem scaling from 100 users to 102 users than it is to go from 100 to 200. And the reason for that is we used to always refer to this as the bucket problem, right? Imagine for a moment you have 3 50-gallon buckets in your data center that, each one of them can hold 50 gallons independently. You probably don't want to hold 150 gallons outright through all of them. So now you fill those buckets and you have 2 more gallons of water that need somewhere to go. What do? Do you go out and buy a 2-gallon bucket? No, you have to go out and buy another 50-gallon bucket because you want to distribute that evenly across all 4 of those at that point. So whatever you've decided your critical mass is, once you get 1 or 2 people above that, are you now willing to jeopardize the way that those 100 folks work to accommodate users number 101 and 102? Or do you now have to make the investment to be able to accommodate 150 users, knowing those other 48 or 49 might never come? Those are some of the things that, I think organizations see as a challenge. But again, it's really easy to think we're dealing only in large numbers and oh, well, we might not have that growth trajectory, or maybe we're not an M&A based company that's going to go out and do a 100 user practice acquisition. But it could be as simple as like, hey, busy season in an accounting department's coming along, and you're going to hire, 3 new external tax auditors who need a place to go and a place to do their work. So you might be built to accommodate 75 users. Now you need to accommodate 80, right? Not that big of a change, but that can mean a fundamental change within your overall infrastructure to be able to support that additional workload.
Yeah, we're finding a lot of seasonality impact, whether it be in financial services or retail. There are always some sort of events that are happening that require people to scale up. If you're a mortgage servicer and you're a sub-servicer and you're taking on pools of loans from various investors, that can be, I need another 75 or 80 people for 6 weeks. And to your point, Kevin, I might have enough for, 60 of them. And in order to accommodate the balance, I need a whole other bucket of infrastructure, so to speak, and then put it in terms you put it in. And I will tell you, having been the person that's had to face that, you buy it. You buy it because the risk of sinking the ship by overtaxing your infrastructure to cheap out on 1 or 2 people, the cost of that impact far exceeds the cost of that additional bucket. But then I've got underutilized infrastructure for a very long period of time.
Yeah. At that point, I would rather, if I were that financial services company, I'd rather just have those 2 auditors sit in a conference room and not work than have them potentially, cause a detrimental impact to the productivity of the 100 accountants or auditors that have to be in there working in addition to them.
Yeah.
You don't get the luxury of making that decision as the IT leader in an organization usually.
I want to pull us into server virtualization for a second. That's okay. We talk a lot about desktop, and it's near and dear to our heart. It meets the front lines, and it's very, very important to have a desktop experience that is reliable and scalable. But if I'm a company, through all of the the changes that have gone on, and maybe I'm with a company that's provided some virtualized services for me because I wanted to host my infrastructure adjacent to a solution. But now I'm looking for a virtual private company like an Evolve. Give me some of the, what's that glide path look like? I've got virtualized infrastructure, sitting in a particular space. I want to move it. I want to clone it, whatever the terms are of the day. How does Evolve handle that? I've got this infrastructure. It's living in another host. I want to move it to you. What does that look like?
Yeah, no, another great question, Vic. So we run into this often, as you can imagine, right? We have a lot of customers. Few and far between are the customers that are building out a brand net new infrastructure with us. It's mostly migrations coming in of existing systems that are somewhere. Now, the answer is, I'll put my engineering hat on for a second. It depends, right? Because obviously it's going to be a massive difference if it's a customer that's running an in-house virtual workload that's already on VMware, or working with another cloud service provider that's also on VMware, versus if they're moving, physical systems that have to be virtualized as part of that migration. Or maybe they're virtualized, but they're on Zen server, right? So they're on Citrix as hypervisor, or they're Nutanix, or they're already in the public cloud in AWS. So migration paths can really vary depending upon the circumstances of where a user is coming from. That said, the vast majority of times what we look to do is, because we are also a business continuity and disaster recovery provider, that arms us with a unique and amazing set that we can leverage in order to get those systems from point A to point B. So we would approach most of our customers and saying, hey, look, we're going to do this the same way we would do it if you were a DR customer. Right? We're going to come in, we're going to get our DR tooling configured. We're going to start asynchronous replication across some form of site connectivity back to our data center. Mm-hmm. That can take as long as it needs to take. While that's going on, there are other things that we can be doing to work on prepping the environment. Once that's done, we figure out a pre-agreed upon date and time, that you will, shut your systems down on your side, bring them all up in production on our side. But oh, by the way, because we used a DR tool to do this, before we get to that cutover date, I want you to do a DR test. And that DR test is going to allow you to stand all of that stuff up in an isolated bubble environment that has no external access, that allows you to verify the migration was successful, all of my systems are there, all of my applications and my data integrity is intact, and everything in that isolated bubble is working. So that eases a lot of the concern, a lot of the apprehension that goes into when the time for that production cutover comes. So that's our preferred path. Now, that said, there are a variety of other means that we can use for over-the-wire replication. There have been some situations where we've done some traditional kind of sneaker net stuff as well for customers that have done exports out to external hard drives, sent us storage devices. Yeah, we prefer not to go those routes unless we have to, but there's a lot of flexibility there for us to accommodate what a specific customer's needs are.
That's awesome. Hey guys, this has been great, and I think we got a ton of good content here for our customers and potential customers. Kevin, is there something you would like to add as a wrap that you think is important that we might not have covered just yet?
Yeah, I think the only thing for me, Vic, is, obviously security is the name of the game these days, for not only IT considerations, but a lot of the conversations that drive the other things that we all do that maybe in our minds aren't security related. So things like hosted infrastructure, things like DAS as an end user computing tool, things like business continuity, disaster recovery, IT resiliency, and backup. And a lot of that is really being driven by, in my opinion, you look at the Gartners and the Frost and Sullivans and the Forresters of the world. And in general, the consensus seems to be in the last 2 to 3 years, IT budgets have been, trending downward, right? But while those budgets are trending downward, two things that are trending up are security and CX, right? So customer experience, and we can kind of lump user experience in with that as well. So I feel like, especially for prospective customers or folks that might be IT buyers that are watching this, it's how do we re-rationalize all of the different IT solution options that are available to us in the context of those two things? And that's not to, try to kind of force something in where it's not a fit, but it's to make the internal sale, the internal approach to your own executive team of like how we get to embrace and adopt new technologies. Things have to make sure we're checking the boxes for that, right? How does this tool help us from a security perspective? How does this help us ensure that we're protecting ourselves against ransomware, against viruses, against phishing attempts? How do we make sure that all the things that we're doing help to not only make our security better, but also elevate our customer and user experiences at the same time? And for the longest time, it was usually one of those things at the behest of the other, right? So striking that balancing act of like, how can we make an environment more secure? While we make it more secure, how can we also make it more productive and more usable and more user-friendly? And maybe kind of wrapping all of this back up, I feel like, to me, that's where you gain the ultimate benefit of working with a D&M and working with an Evolve IP is we have the exposure in the market of being able to find ways to take all of the awesome tools that we know we have in our toolbox and build the right thing that helps that specific customer achieve those goals. So, making their environment more secure, making their users more productive, making their executive team more happy. And oh, by the way, if we can help you save money in doing all of that, even better.
Yeah, for sure.